members of the conference organizing committee, distinguished guests, and distinguished dignitaries of the governing body of the college, professors, lecturers, and non-teaching staff, the present research conference presenters, and dear students. It is a very pleasant morning of a glorious day to step into this dais of this esteemed institution as a speaker of importance, setting the tone of the international conference. I am really overwhelmed by the welcome accorded and the hospitality given to me. I thank every single member of the Bellubbi College Society for inviting me to the conference and the honor bestowed on me. Before I take off, I appreciate the endeavor of the institution to uphold the values of research by means of organizing conferences like this. Such practices in the name of research do more than preservation of knowledge. They aim at production of knowledge and training of the younger minds to take interest in research. In that sense, organizing such events at large scale is challenging, and the Bellubbi College has done a wonderful job by executing it. Let me now venture into today's theme with a clarification at the outset itself. The theme of the conference being multidisciplinary perspectives on postmodern issues in literature and social sciences. My focus shall span across both literature and social sciences. However, since we have another chief speaker who will be focusing on social sciences, I would confine myself to literature alone. So to speak of postmodernism, we must have a word on modernism as well, as an intellectual movement. Modernism came essentially as a philosophical response to the massive historical transformations, urbanization, industrialization, and the devastation of the World War I. Traditional art forms could not adequately represent the modern experience. So that was the criticism aimed at modernism at liberalism before this. Modernists made formal experiments, so formal in the sense on forms of art, to convey the horrors and other typical experiences of modernity. Actually, they were existential crises. So now, when speaking of postmodernism, a critique qualifies the change, the shift in history as following. The world obviously did change around the mid-century being the middle of the 20th century, in multiple complex ways. Modernist era world wars fought with conventional weapons, gave way to regional conflicts, spasms of genocidal violence, international terrorism, the perennial threat of nuclear annihilation. The old empires collapsed, giving way to new colonial exploitation, and the former imperial subjects flooded into the European metropolises. Postmodernism names a broad and contested set of intellectual responses to the cultural, political, epistemological crisis of the late 20th century. Emerging most visibly after the Second World War, postmodern thought reflects widespread skepticism toward the Enlightenment the Enlightenment ideas that had long underpinned Western conception of knowledge, progress, and truth. In both literature and the social sciences, postmodernism challenges the assumptions that reality can be objectively represented, that history follows a coherent trajectory, or that universal explanations can adequately account for human experience. Rather than offering a single doctrine, postmodernism operates as a critical stance, a critical position, one that interrogates authority, destabilizes meaning, and foregrounds plurality. The term postmodern does not simply indicate what comes after modernism in a chronological sense. Instead, it signals a shift, a change in sensibility and attitude shaped by historical trauma, technological acceleration, global capitalism, and the collapse of faith in overarching narratives of progress. The devastations of world wars, the exposure of colonial violence, and the failures of grand political ideologies of all contributed to doubts about reason as a guarantor of moral and social advancement. So there was a suspicion on reason, on rationality, as something that would liberate us. Jean-Francois Lyotard famously characterized the postmodern condition as incredulity towards meta-narrative. So that we were not willing to believe, not willing to trust the grand narratives, the meta-narratives. By meta-narratives, he meant large-scale explanatory frameworks such as scientific rationalism, Marxist historical materialism, or liberal humanism that claim universal validity. Postmodernism does not necessarily deny the usefulness of such narratives, but questions their authority. Sorry. Postmodernism does not rule out the usefulness of these, narratives. But actually, what postmodernism does is to question their authority. So they don't simply claim that they are fully true. No. Their exclusions and their claims to neutrality, so that we are being neutral. No. Postmodernists are not ready to accept that. Several recurring ideas shape postmodern approaches across disciplines. One is fragmentation, in the sense that social reality, identity, and meaning are no longer unified or stable. Rather than a coherent self, postmodern theory often describes subjectivity as constructed through language, culture, and power relations, constantly shifting across context. Another central concept is the decentering. Traditional philosophy placed the rational, autonomous subject at the center of knowledge production. Postmodern thinkers, most notably Michel Foucault, argued instead what counts as knowledge is inseparable from systems of power. Discourses, institutions, and practices determine which statements are accepted as true and which are marginalized and or silenced. John Baudrillard's notion of simulacra and hyper-reality further complicates the relationship between representation and reality. In a media-saturated world, images and signs no longer merely reflect reality. They produce it. So that's the harsh reality of it. So they produce the reality. The distinction between the real and the represented collapses. The distinction between the real and the represented collapses, giving rise to a culture of copies without originals. Together, these ideas generate a profound skepticism, a doubt toward objectivity, that we can find the actual truth of this world. No, that's not possible at all. Doubt, suspicion, authenticity, and fixed meaning. Skepticism that becomes especially visible in literary form. So where do we find this? So it is in this context we find the usefulness of literature. Literature makes this skepticism visible, openly, explicitly. Right? It doesn't conceal it. So it becomes visibly in literary form. Well, ever since postmodernism begins to be a buzzword in the academic circles since 1960s, postmodernism has begun to manifest itself in many fields of cultural endeavor, such as architecture, literature, photography, film, painting, video, dance, music, and elsewhere. The very attribute of postmodernism is its self-conscious, self-contradictory, and self-undermining character. I think this is something very paradoxical, right? So it is self-conscious, self-contradictory, self-undermining. Linda Archie, her postmodernist critic, imagines it as though saying something about something else within inverted commas. So saying something with inverted commas, which means you cannot read it the usual way. You have to read it with some additional meaning, some intended, some kindled meaning, some new meaning. Which means that underlining brings about a special meaning, which is not the usual one. But this highlighting is done in order to subvert, remember. So we are not simply giving an additional meaning, we are trying to subvert. Right? We are trying to challenge the intended meaning. This consciously special focus switches on an ironic perspective. So that is done with an irony. So which means we are trying to create some tension. So that's what postmodernism does. Ironic perspective on what is apparently stated, or what is apparently stated. So on the surface level, it is trying to convey something. So that's how it would look to everyone. But actually, what the postmodernism does is to kindle, it creates some irony. So therefore, through irony, it is trying to subvert. Then this nudging aspect of communicating skepticism, turns out to be the cardinal trait of postmodernism, which helps expose the duplicity of the narratives in general. The initial concern of postmodernists is to denaturalize the dominant features of our way of life. So denaturalize in the sense, so many things look natural to us, but they are not actually natural, no. So this postmodernism makes us aware of these things as they are not natural, they are constructed ones. So we call it as denaturalize. What are those phenomena which assume as natural? For example, patriarchy, right? Capitalism, another example. These are not the givens. These were created, constructed, conquered, right? These are made of us by man himself. Roland Barthes says postmodernism wants to detoxify something similar to denaturalize, detoxify cultural representations. In that respect, postmodernism ventures beyond the aesthetic arena. So then we cannot simply say that it is confined, it is limited to art and literature. It is something political. It is trying to do something by words. So do words have power? Yes, real. By this nudging, this kindling, it begins to assume some power. Right? So in that sense, postmodernism becomes a political, it enters into political arena to critique the dominating aspects of life. The most daring challenge thrown by postmodernism is that it questions whether any single perspective can capture a reality completely. So I refer to this earlier also. It examines how language, power structures, and cultural systems shape what we consider as knowledge. So we assume certain things are natural and we don't question it. Why? Because we totally get submerged in it, totally believe it, trust it. So therefore we don't get any suspicion about it. But postmodernism creates a tension there. It questions whether any single perspective can capture reality completely. It examines how language, power structures, cultural systems shape what we consider as knowledge. After the Second World War, technological changes, communication revolution, created conditions for radical change, something revolutionary. Scientific rationality produced death camps and atomic weapons. So then we think, okay, education, studies, all these things provide us with better things, advancement, and we go higher and higher. Are you really going higher and higher? Are you really getting advanced? So this became a question after the World War, because the Second World War, we saw with the help of advancement of technologies, we fought the war. And so many died. So death camps, artificially man-made created death camps, atomic weapons, right? So mass media shape the human perception and experience fundamentally. Mass media. So then the newspapers, the news media, they create something. So even though they may not be true, they create some reality, some fake reality, and we tend to believe them, even though they may not be actually there, right? And this perception and experience created an impact on the minds of the people. The Enlightenment promise, the Renaissance, Enlightenment promise was that reason would lead to progress. So this was what the humanity thought. Such grand ambitions about history, progress, and so often served power rather than liberation. So instead of getting the people liberated, they served the power structures to continue to suppress, subjugate the people. Thinkers showed how knowledge system excluded certain voices. Certain voices are marginalized, excluded. Exclusion happened. Actually, this is what postmodernism opposes. So certain voices are excluded by privileging others. Certain voices are given priority, preference. They show how the categories we assume as natural are actually historical constructions. Understanding its philosophical arguments and its historical emergence clarifies this well. It shows how ideas intersect with social practices, institutions, and power relations. Power grew from specific philosophical roots and historical transformations. Little history into the beginning of postmodernism. Philosophical groundwork begins with Immanuel Kant's revolutionary insight as late as the 18th century. Kant argued we cannot do no things as they exist independently of our minds. Our minds actually structure our experience rather than passively receiving the reality. So structure in the sense, we see things and then we think, oh, this is what is really happening. But actually they are not really happening. We are made to think that way. So that's what I refer to as seeming, assuming natural. Our minds actively structure our experience rather than passively receiving reality. This means that we never access reality directly, but through conceptual frameworks. If knowledge depends on our conceptual apparatus, how does one ensure objectivity? So then how can we find the actual truth out there? Can we really find the truth? Which is Hegel contributed further to this insight in the 19th century. He argued that immediate sense experience involves mediation through concepts and language. Everything we know is mediated through conceptual structures that develop historically down the ages. Hegel proposed that this development, this idea, this growth of idea, follows a dialectical logic toward absolute knowledge. So then he thought, okay, the ideas are, gradually accumulating knowledge, and then at one day we will gain the absolute knowledge, the full knowledge of this world. We will get to know everything. But later it was questioned whether such absolute knowledge was achievable or even desirable. So later things after Hegel, thinkers began to doubt whether this absolute knowledge, this full knowledge of this world is possible. So now we go to NASA, we go to moon and all, and we think that we will find out the entire truth about the world. But is it possible? Or is it even desirable? So what do we get out of that? Is it desirable? Science and technology, mass communication and transportation networks fundamentally reshape human perception. This technological transformation had profound effects on human subjectivity, human character, and reality itself, whereby identity itself becomes fluid and uncertain. So then, I call myself as me, right? So am I really there? So how do I refer to myself? So that identity is no longer the same identity hereafter. Every moment I keep changing. Every one of us. So our identity becomes free. Our understanding of identity has become very free and unsettled. The collapse of the traditional metaphysical distinctions opened space for postmodern thinking. The collapse of the traditional metaphysical distinction. Right? Nietzsche's genealogical method becomes similar to postmodernism. Nietzsche, the original person, original thinker. Instead of seeking origins as fixed foundations, genealogy studies accidents and contingencies that conclude crucial moments. This was his method. This method exposes how concepts that we assume as a actually have contingent histories. They happen as accidental. The concept of the self or I is a case in point. Nietzsche maintained that this concept arose from the moral imperative to be responsible for action. So Nietzsche, he wanted to hold the person responsible for his action. So this was the identity he used to hold. To be responsible, he was assuming the course of actions as identical subjects. So yesterday I did one thing, today I did one thing, tomorrow I will do something, and are these being done by the same person or different persons? So when we try to hold the person who is responsible for those actions, we begin to have stable identity. So which means we are trying to create, construct an identity. We are trying to construct a stable, firm identity, but actually it is not stable. The I become a social construction and moral illusion rather than metaphysical truth. So metaphysical truth means the actual truth that is out there is really existing. No. This genealogical approach reveals how our relations and social needs and generic concepts that present themselves as necessary truths. Lacan, the psychoanalyst, insisted that the Freudian unconscious functions through language rather than biological drives. Language belongs to symbolic order. I think let's skip a little, right? I'll look into some very key person, Lyotard. Jean-Francois Lyotard's book, The Postmodern Condition, was published in 1979. Lyotard introduced the term postmodern into the discourse. He defined it as incredulity to meta-narratives. I said previously. Meta-narratives are overarching stories. Meta-narratives are overarching stories. Big stories, larger stories. They claim to explore history, progress, and the worlds of humanity. So larger stories which relate to the general humanity, the general human kind. Two principal meta-narratives dominated modernity, according to Lyotard. So he says two large narratives dominated the human history. The first, deriving from Hegel, present history as progressing towards totality and unity all knowledge. The second sprung from Marx. He gives science a role in the emancipation of humanity from oppression. Knowledge production serves the grand project of human liberation and social progress. Lyotard argues that these meta-narratives have lost credibility in the postmodern conditions. So this is what postmodernism does. The collapse of meta-narratives creates a situation for radical pluralism. So pluralism is promoted. Radical pluralism. Knowledge fragments into heterogeneous language games without overarching unity. No single meta-language can encompass all these heterogeneous games. We are affected by multiple unpresentables without any framework to organize them. Modern art presents the unpresentable as missing content within beautiful forms. Modern art, what does modern art do? So I mean, okay, I'm speaking of literature, but then let's have a look in the art very briefly. So what does modern art do? And what does when we describe in the painting show something, when a sculpture shows something? So what sort of idea are we getting? What is it actually trying to do? That picture, that sculpture, that painting. So what is it actually trying to do? It presents the unpresentable. Unpresentable is very difficult to fathom, figure out. Such an idea, such a metaphysical truth of this world, the unpresentable. So it is a missing content, right? That missing content is beautifully presented as a picture, as a sculpture, any art form. Right? That happened in the modern era. But in postmodern era, that beautiful form itself is gone. Right? Postmodern art abandons the beautiful form itself. when present and unpresent. So in postmodern, the pictures are not beautiful. The sculptures are not that beautiful. They assume different portions. Incredulity towards meta-analysis captures something essential about the contemporary experience. So then this incredulity, we are not ready to believe the larger stories, the grand narratives. So this is the essence about the contemporary experience. Contemporary experience, every one of us, right, today. Are we really, so what sort of feeling, what sort of experience are we having regarding everything that happened to us? So we are not ready to trust, right? Incredulity. Okay. So one more thinker, Derrida, one of the key names in postmodernism, deconstruction. Derrida introduced deconstruction as a method of reading. So then I think we may sometimes confuse with theory. No, it's not a theory, it's a method. It's a method of reading. It's a method of reading and understanding a text, right? So we use the word text, not book or word. Text. Text means the text doesn't have a final meaning. So when we read a book, we say, this says something. But literary works or art works, they don't do so. The meaning is endless. The meaning is open. So if there are some 200 people here, 200 readings, 200 ideas may be there. And every time, if I read 100 times, I may get some 100 meanings. Every time I read, some new meaning emerges. In 1967, he published 3 books, which created a revolution in thinking. Deconstruction begins with close attention to text. How text construct meaning through propositions like presence and absence, speech and writing, nature and culture. So then it presents binaries, and with the help of binaries, he tries to create a picture about this world. Right? In each pair, one term gets privileged as primary, original, superior. The other becomes secondary, derivative, inferior. Derrida shows how these hierarchies are not natural and necessary but constructed and maintained through specific operations. More importantly, he showed how the privileged term actually depends on what it excludes. Consider the opposition between speech and writing in Western philosophy. From Plato to modern linguistics, speech has been privileged as primary language. Speech is believed to provide immediate access to meaning because the speaker is present. Speech is believed to provide immediate access to meaning because the speaker is present. Writing becomes merely secondary. Writing becomes merely secondary representation of speech, functioning in the speaker's absence. Derrida called this privileging of speech as logocentrism. So logos refers to speech, thought, or reason, and logos in Greek philosophy. Right? Deconstruction spread far beyond philosophy into literary criticism, law, architecture, feminism, and postmodern studies. In literary criticism, deconstruction shows how texts undermine their apparent meanings and contain multiple interpretation possibilities. Michel Foucault, draws our focus on discourse. Discourse is the context of speech, representation, knowledge, and understanding. It defines what can be said, studied, and process of doing so. Such surveillances are coded as discourses, or terrains of thought, or systems of thought. Defines what may be permitted and what may not be permitted. Right? Discourse, if you remember the word discourse, right? So they decide. They are kind of surveillance things, right? Word for surveillance. So what may be permitted, what may not be permitted. For instance, religions preach particular norms of behavior as acceptable. Medicine prescribes preferred styles of living. Psychiatry systematizes, categorizes, and of deviant behaviors. By means of control over discourses, power is retained by structures of power. Such a discovery created skepticism on the forms of discourses. Power is not something unitary, but exists outside everyone. Not just with one who is ruling, but also with the ones who are being ruled. Michel Foucault's insights into the workings of power presents power as a precondition for resistance. Foucault's insistence on the connection of knowledge and power has resulted in the inseparable character of both from each other. So now, what does it have to do with literature? Themes of epistemological doubt are central to the postmodernist text. Postmodern novels often question whether truth can be known at all, especially in relation to history, rather than presenting the past as stable sequence of facts. They expose historical narratives as selective, ideological, and open to revision. This is particularly evident in post-colonial feminist writing. Postmodern literature both reflects and enacts theoretical concerns through its formal experimentation, forms. One of its defining features is metafiction. Their own texts that draw attention to their own constructiveness by breaking the illusion of narrative transparency. Postmodern writers force readers to confront the instability of storytelling and interpretation. So this is something connected with literature. Now, literary texts are narratives. The insights afforded by the foregoing thoughts, foregoing philosophy, help read narratives with better clarity. Roland Barthes' idea of textuality. So what does textuality mean? The process of reading. So Roland Barthes' idea of textuality and Derrida's idea of the text as open-ended is what constitutes the text. Many textualities may work at a time colliding with each other for performance. The reader may tease out the text any number of times in anticipation, looking for meanings. But texts are characterized by intertext. So in a text we find intertext, right? References to other texts from contemporary times as well as historical times, which may abound in irony, pastiche, parody, etc. As I had previously stated, this nudging character of postmodernism shows appears by dint of such play as parody, pastiche, or irony. These strategies topple the complacency and causes attention of a number of ideas to surface. No single point or theme is given attention. Thus, the literary text is open for any number of readings in postmodern context. While textuality affords an open-ended readings, postmodern narratology encourages the use of so-called devices, parody, pastiche, irony, and a number of other devices which help overcome the semantic restrictions with achronology, non-linear narration, metafiction, formal innovations, stream of consciousness, magical realism, wordplay, absence of one consistent point of view, mingling of fact and fiction. These are strategies, formal strategies. Mixing of popular and high art and culture, no teleology, no ending view. So postmodern writers turn out textual devices. You may all remember Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children or Arundhati Roy's The Golden Small Things. So these are novels which are written with allusive intellectual references. Whether prose or poetry, they embody such devices to unsettle, to disturb, to challenge the authority, to challenge the complacency, the unempathetic, and the unthinking ones, by recourse to laying bare strategies. The benefit of such postmodernist turn is that the marginalized people may not always be at the receiving end of all oppressive nations. It democratizes literature, it promotes pluralism, which is all embracing. It kindles a reconsideration of positions, perspectives, decisions, and worldviews. So, in conclusion, I would say one of the words. Postmodernism in literature and the social science is misunderstood, not as a doctrine, but as a mode of questioning. It destabilizes certainties, interrogates authority, and insists on the plurality of meanings and experience. While it critiques difficult problems, particularly concerning truth and politics, they also provide powerful tools for analyzing a complex, fragmented world. Whether embraced, revised, resisted, postmodernism continues to shape how knowledge is produced in narrative and context. So thank you for your patience. I have to rush and finish now. And so I hope that I have given you a single idea to take home, right? Because I was repeating the same idea at some point. So thank you for the opportunity, and I thank again the Bellubbi College administration management and the Bellubbi college principal and the conference organizing committee.